And we are very excited to have these types of discussions with one of the co-founders of NineDot, but also Columbia alums who've coming to visit back. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. And maybe what I'll go around is, people can introduce themselves just with a 1-minute sentence and then give us a brief background. So maybe I'll start on this side. So Bruce, my colleague.
I give very brief. Many of you know me. I'm on the faculty here. I'm Bruce Usher, and I lead our climate change pathway courses here.
All right. Bobby Shortino, mechanical engineering 07, and then sustainability management through SPS 2012. Working in energy since 2012, and kind of stumbled into batteries 2018, and it's been a really exciting growth sector that I've been thrilled to be a part of.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for studying NineDot and what we're working on. So I'm Adam Cohen. I'm the CTO and co-founder of NineDot Energy. We started the company, I think my co-founder might sneak in a few minutes. We started the company in 2015, and after a few pivots, ended up in New York City in 2018. We started, David and I, sharing one desk at the NYU Urban Future Lab in downtown Brooklyn, which is part of the School of Engineering. We were lucky enough to get one seat in their clean tech incubator. And today we have 70 employees based in New York City building these projects. And so I'm really pleased to invite, we have a number of folks from Columbia who graduated from different departments here. And I thought, as we're coming here to talk about what we do for the city, I wanted to bring my colleagues who also kind of grew up here and what they've done since leaving this campus, or the other campus.
It's all one big campus.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Olivia Booth Howe. I'm the manager of engineering and planning at NineDot. I studied earth and environmental engineering at Columbia, and I graduated during the pandemic in my mother's living room. So this is the first time I've been back since then. And I've kind of been riding this wave of the New York City energy transition since graduating. I started at a rooftop solar developer and then transitioned to NineDot 2 years ago. And it's just been really exciting going from these 100 kilowatt solar arrays on these old rooftops in New York City to these megawatt scale battery projects, and working alongside this team that it really feels like we're set up to make a dent in this energy transition in New York City.
Pretty cool. And I'm Daniel Guetta, a professor here at the business school. I was very fortunate to get to work with Adam and his team and Professor Besbes in writing the NineDot case that many of you have studied. And I'm excited to be here to find out the latest and greatest when it comes to NineDot.
And I'm Omar Besbes. I'm a faculty here, again, teaching analytics and doing research around data-driven algorithms. And recently, I've also been exploring questions actually around energy and the impact that large batteries have on the market. So this is very exciting also to have you here. So maybe I thought we would start with a few questions, and then we would open it up a bit later to the audience as well. So maybe, Daniel, do you want to start it off with some broad-level questions?
That sounds great. At a high level, I would love to hear from each one of you what the latest and greatest is at NineDot. So, last time we spoke, I think, was probably a year ago. We moved on an academic timescale, so it took us a while to write the case after we spoke to Adam and his team. I'd love to hear what the latest and greatest is, and maybe from each one of you, maybe we'll start with you, Adam, but then from each one of you, what are you particularly most excited about in terms of what NineDot is getting up to?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we started with handful of employees. Now we have 70 folks who are working on everything from real estate origination, finance, but then the actual operations, building, constructing, and turning on batteries, making the grid actually work. And so a year ago, we talked about turning on that first battery and having that, what it did for the power grid, what its value is, where it should be located. Now we have dozens of sites all in late stage development. And so we've gone from sort of a bit player in New York City who have tinkering at the edges to now New York State, the federal government, the city getting on board, trying to show that this is how New York City can decarbonize. And so in the last year, New York State introduced a 6 gigawatt goal for energy storage by 2030. And so they doubled their goal because they saw what the successes of it could be. So, and during that time, we've grown up as a company where now, taking these ideas that were sort of a blueprint on a piece of paper, and now we're building actual projects. And so part of that is getting pieces of land, which we can talk about, getting projects approved by the city government and the fire department, getting projects actually constructed and turned on. And a lot of that is building business models and business model innovation. And so it has to all be accompanied by financing for the company, financing for projects, financing for development. And so in the last, this past year, we've announced, I think we've raised $450 million for this operation in terms of all of those stages. So we've gone from people tinkering in the Urban Future Lab, trying to think about what the future of New York City energy could be, to actually building it and getting people behind that.
Fantastic. And tell me, I'm curious, what do you think would surprise people the most in this room about what makes it difficult to deploy a battery, like a battery site in the New York area?
So we like to say, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
And that's
I
because it's
remember
so
that.
hard to do things in New York City. I mean, we're a dense urban environment. We have the most stringent requirements. Probably we set the global standard for how to install safely battery energy storage, lithium-ion batteries in a setting. Every other jurisdiction in the world, every major city looks to what New York City has done. We have the most professional fire department in the world. They have a team who look at the individual cells, the individual modules, the individual sites. And so, yes, there are umpteen different approvals you need for an individual site. But if you can navigate all of that, you've done something that's really important and something that's scalable, because even if you don't build to another city, New York is such a large marketplace. Outside of New York City, maybe you're following a slightly different rule set, but you can build 2, 3, 4 projects. Here, if you can build 2, 3, 4, you can build 200 or 300 or 500. And so this scalability is incredible, because we're a small area of New York State, but we are a third of all the electricity usage.
Very cool. Bobby, what are you most excited about?
It's not sexy, but innovation in permitting frameworks, which
I'm sensing a pattern here, right?
yeah, the Department of Buildings and the Fire Department of New York are very rigorous, very stringent, and that's one of the biggest barriers to our success, and one of the most unpredictable timelines, unfortunately, in the life cycle of a project. If you're looking at maybe 3 years from site acquisition to being operational, that could take maybe 6 months, or it might take 18 months, and that's been a bit of a pain point. But we've invested a lot in helping to shape that those frameworks, and trying to have a front row seat in advocating for changes and developments that can streamline those. And the big sales pitch to these authorities having jurisdiction is, one entity is saying, hey, we want to deploy the storage. We're like, great, that's not going to happen unless you make these frameworks less onerous. And I'm not saying to skimp on safety, but innovate in government as opposed to just in the private sector, right? Like, get a better web platform, like really simple little things, but there's that's something that needs to happen for us to be able to do the scale of deployment that we want and that the industry broadly wants.
Olivia.
So Adam mentioned our pipeline, and that's really what I'm excited about, is how much it has been growing over the last 2 years that I've been with NineDot. My role, I will see a site come in as a parking lot in the outskirts of Queens, and watch it go through the interconnection process and the design and engineering process and permitting, and all the way up until we hand it off to Bobby's team to go build it. And in this position, we joke, what does the con in Con Ed stand for? Consolidated, believe it or not. That's the joke. It's far from consolidated. The grid that we're working in there's underground lines, there's overground lines, there's more than three different voltages, that we're working with. They're built at different times in different areas in different ways, and all of that makes it hard to interconnect to, and to design to interconnect to. And over the last couple years here at NineDot, I've seen us make a lot of progress with how we work with Con Ed to tie into their grid. And we're working on very exciting things with them right now to make it, even easier. And for the pipeline that we've built, when it comes to time to, buy the equipment and interconnect into the grid, we have a lot of, promising innovation going on there. And that's really exciting to me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Just to round that out, what I'm most excited about, we're building projects, we're building a business model, but we're really building a team that can go and execute on that. And so providing the opportunities for people to learn and grow. And so I'm really glad that we can come talk to your students and bring folks who were at Columbia to tell that story.
Great. Bruce, do you want to take us a little bit down the technology path?
Sure. Talked a lot about excitement around projects and permitting and clients and teams, but no one's mentioned the core to your business, which is batteries.
Mm-hmm.
So I have actually two interrelated questions. One is battery technology. What do you see developing in battery technology? Do you see some very different technologies coming along, or is it all lithium ion? Where's the battery technology and sort of cost curves headed? And then the related question is politics
Mhm.
at the national level. In other words, brewing, current tariffs, maybe more tariffs. How does that affect the technology developments and implications?
So first, and say we're not a battery technology company.
Yeah,
We're not
I
even a
get
battery company, right? We're a clean energy development company. We have ideas of how to make a city, the planet, cleaner, greener. It happens to be that batteries in New York City fit part of this puzzle. And so this technology with this market, with this economics, with this, you put it all together, and yes, you can build a business model. We're not tied to that. Things could change over time. We have a certain way of thinking about putting those pieces together, building a team that can go execute on it. I think that is really the core of our business, not batteries. So I'll talk a little bit about battery technology, and it follows a similar framework to other clean energy technologies or other just integrated technologies. There's something called the experience curve or the learning curve framework for, say, every doubling of the number of batteries that we as humankind build, there's a 20% cost reduction. It's just about what we've seen. We've seen solar photovoltaics. We've seen it in semiconductors. For whatever reason, we don't really understand why, this power law curve of learning, right? Human beings, as we work together, we create technologies and reduce the cost of things. That's actually not a law about science or technology. It's a law about human psychology, human innovation. And it has it's not just related to how we tinker with the anodes and cathodes. It has to do with supply chains. It has to do with building factories and the scale of them. But one of the places that we often get caught, so I started my career at the Department of Energy as a postdoctoral fellow in the solar office, thinking I'd work, I'm a physicist by training. I thought I'd work in photovoltaics and optics, electronics, to make cost reduction happen. And when I started digging into how batteries or clean energy actually gets deployed, it's not the cost curve of the technology that makes or breaks a market. It's the market and what we call the soft costs, all of the non-hardware costs of going solar or getting batteries or building clean energy. And we often forget that that's where a lot of the innovation occurs. And so I can talk about battery technology, but I think that's such a minute part of the actual story of getting things done. We could talk, I can talk. I think you have some ideas you wanted to say.
Well, I guess maybe, I have maybe a different sort of perspective on this question, which, when I hear this question, it makes me think actually of the QWERTY keyboard, and I can explain why. Because that keyboard was designed to be inefficient. It was designed to slow down the person typing, the user, so that all the, on the typewriter, all those little handlebars wouldn't get all jammed up. And now you look around everywhere, and that inefficient design is everywhere. And that idea of that technology kind of lock-in that we're stuck in here comes to mind because, for example, I love the idea of a solid state battery. It's more efficient, it charges faster, it's more energy dense, it lasts longer, it's less
Can you tell us what is a
susceptible.
solid state battery?
Yeah, so it's with like a current lithium ion battery, there's a liquid electrolyte, and that's how the ions flow from the anode to the cathode. And in a solid state battery, it's a solid material. And so that's the main difference, and it has all these benefits, and it's less, everything. I've listed a couple, and it's less susceptible to thermal runaway is another biggie. And you look at it after you hear all.
I love using thermal runaway for explosion. I
have all sorts of euphemisms.
Thermal runaway. I love it.
But yeah, so you and that technology is there. But why don't we see it? Why aren't we using it? It's efficient, it's better, it's why aren't we using it? And it's because we don't have manufacturing facilities that can build it. And so, right now we're kind of in that that idea of that technology lock-in, where maybe the best, most efficient technology isn't what we're going to end up using on a large scale. And just when I hear these questions about what's the next best technology, that's kind of where my mind goes. Is there are better technologies out there, but are we in reality, is that going to be what takes over? Jury's out.
But some of the question is should we slow down development? Should we wait because there might be something across the line in 5 years and 10 years, or should we use what we have now?
Don't worry.
Right? And so this is part of our business model. We want to continue evolving, learning about new things, bringing them to market, figuring out this puzzle to put it all together where technology is the one piece. So we care about long duration energy storage, we care about vehicle to grid, all these things that we think could be part of the future of New York City, part of the United States, part of the global energy transition. But you also need to do, right? So.
Go ahead. Politically, do we think that's going to be a change?
Touch the ball.
I'm curious.
It's the third rail kind of question. But is that something that I mean, I know the soft, everything else is very larger.
So we've had a very supportive framework out of, say, Washington for the last 4 years, and we have a very supportive framework in New York State, very supportive framework in New York City. Yeah. You need all of that, local, state, federal, and energy is a complex system with lots of regulations. And yes, things could change in Washington, right? So one of the most important things that happened in the last 4 years is the Inflation Reduction Act, which extended the investment tax credit to new technologies, extended the runway. And so initially, if you built a battery energy storage project that was connected to a solar array, then the whole thing would get a 30% tax credit from the federal government, which supported the solar plus storage market. If you built a battery apart from the solar project, you would not get the 30% tax credit. That means all batteries that went in were connected to a solar project, right? I mean, of course. But it turns out most batteries shouldn't be technically connected to directly to a solar array. It's technically better to be at the grid edge, where I'd have a hard time finding 25 acres for a 5 megawatt solar farm in Manhattan, but I can still find 3,000 square feet here and there and fill in the land to build 5 megawatts to support thousands of homes. And so that was a huge innovation. There's other parts of that bill as well. And our expectation is that out of Washington, that legislation will likely stay. But it creates opportunities for innovation, financial innovation, to think about how do you lock some requirements in. And so, yeah, of course, we're thinking about it, but it's not making us slow down. It's making us actually speed up, get things in the ground.
I mean, now speaking about the long term, I mean, New York State has set out a goal for a zero-emission grid by 2040. Can you walk us a little bit through what does this mean over the next decades, and what's the role of NineDot Energy in that transition?
Right. So New York State has some of the most aggressive goals for clean energy anywhere in the country. So in 2019, actually, basically from the remnants of the last administration, the states took over and thought about what goal sets should they set, what type of funding and policies should they have in place to support clean energy. And so New York took the leadership and they passed a climate law called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, right? The CLCPA, or Climate Act. And they set goals for different technologies and also these broad economy-wide goals in 2040 and 2050 and 2030, interim goals. And that's to do with solar, distributed solar in particular, where actually New York State has met and surpassed their goal more cost effectively than they planned to for 2025. There are now 6 gigawatts of operating distributed solar in New York State. It was a massive achievement over a decade of work. There's goals for energy storage, which they set in that goal, in that law, and then they've actually doubled it in the last year because they decided we needed more of it. And then offshore wind. And so all of that comes together to rethink our grid, so we can shut down these dirty peaker plants that are all about New York City, and shut down natural gas power plants upstate, and think about the grid that we want. And a lot of that relies on financing. A lot of it relies on federal incentives. It relies on, some of it relies on federal policy in terms of permitting. So the offshore wind industry of New York, which will largely be off the coast of Long Island, it relies heavily on the policies of the federal government and permits. And I think the state has already determined that actually we're not going to meet our 2030 goals. It's probably going to be 2 or 3 years out. Not the end of the world if it's 2 or 3 years out, but I think what we're going to see, I don't exactly remember what your question is, but what we're going to see is over the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to see the Assembly of New York and the Senate of New York thinking about how to maintain this leadership.
Is it an aspirational goal, or is it a realistic goal to have a zero-emission grid by 2040 in New York State?
I think we have the technologies to do this now. It's about deploying them in a cost-effective manner and doing it so that we're making decisions based off today's technologies and not waiting down the line. I think this is where we are. If we don't meet 2040, we meet 2045. But what we can't do is wait till 2080, right? And so we need to think about these things. And it's not just the electricity sector, it's the transportation sector, it's the building sector, and most emissions in New York City come from buildings. It's a really challenging thing to decarbonize. We have trillions of dollars of real estate that have been put in place over hundreds of years, and you have to go building by building and site specific. And so you have to think cleverly about that. And there's lots of really cool business models that can start from a little idea that you do in 1 or 2 buildings. And what's great about New York, if you can find 1 or 2 buildings where that works, you can find 1,000 and 2,000, 10,000 buildings. And so that's kind of the story I want to tell here today. There's so much room for innovation. It's about business model innovation. Yes, it's about the technologies, but it's about putting that whole framework together. There are so many different ideas that can come together, be financed and be built and build a business around.
What can I add to that?
Please.
Well, I think working on the execution side, we have only 3 megawatts operating now, but we have 35 megawatts in construction that will be shortly operating. That's a significant jump. Then we're bidding out to build another 25 megawatts, and our development pipeline, as we've publicly stated, but which I can attest to is on track, is 400 megawatts by the end of 2026, right? It won't necessarily all be operating by that time, but it'll be in various stages of development. And we're just going to continue to scale from there. Now, yes, we all know that land in New York is finite, but we'll continue to change as the opportunities. We don't need to only install on like small 5,000 square foot parcels scattered around the boroughs, right? Next, we can be doing more rooftop storage, right? And then eventually you'll do indoor. And so the scale of the opportunity will continue to grow. And so again, by 2026, 400 megawatts out of 6 gigawatts is, not a trivial percentage. And if we can keep scaling from there, then I think we get closer and closer to that goal, right? And we're just one company doing this, and there are lots of others. So to give you a sense, I'm an eternal optimist and an in-house optimist, but not that others aren't. But so, I really think that we're headed in the right direction and like on a good cadence.
And one of the things I've noticed, I'm not sure if you have, there are other cities besides New York.
Yeah.
So untold.
And
Blasphemy.
And so there's lots of opportunity. And so New York is one of pioneering a really novel rule set for battery energy storage, for clean energy, for what's called distributed energy resources. And it's taken a lead in setting how to value when you put power back in the grid from a set of solar panels or a set of battery banks. Other states, other cities, other nations are looking at what New York does. So if we're successful here, I think the rule sets will look more like New York than New York looking like other places.
Well, give me an idea of how, based on the amount of capacity you're already sort of heralding in York, sort of in the New York area, and how much you're going to have in the future, how do you expect it's actually going to impact energy markets, prices of energy and prices of electricity? And it sounds like you're going to have you're not just going to be price takers anymore. There's going to be a significant impact, especially in those days of the summer when the grid is really stretched. How do you think about that, and what impact do you think it'll have?
So the way we use batteries today is remarkably dumb. Right?
Yeah, I want to hear more about that. What's the...
So they're replacing, the way we use peaker plants, the energy system,
That's
is
literally
remarkably dumb,
Yeah.
right? We have peaker plants in New York City that we run for 300 hours during the year. And right, there are 8,760 hours during the year, and we use them for 300.
Did you just calculate that, or did you know that?
Except during leap years, it turns out. Right?
Goodness,
20,
okay.
there's 24 more of them. You can check that out. And so the energy system is remarkably inefficient. It's all designed for the peakiest hour of the peakiest day of the year. And so that happens, turns out, 1 hour during the year each year. And so we have to design everything around that. We have to design every power plant, every substation, every power line, every transformer, every home to use the power at exactly that moment. And if you don't, the whole thing falls. And so that's the way battery energy storage, the electricity system has always been built. It's been built that way since 1880 when Thomas Edison turned on the Pearl Street plant down in Lower Manhattan. You had to instantaneously, when you needed power, you had to ramp up your engine or ramp down your engine. Energy storage changes all of that. So it lets you pull power when you have excess power, and it lets you put out that power when you need it. And it also enables hosting of variable renewables. So now, instead of the demand being the thing that fluctuates, and you have to make everything, how do you have to have a big control room in Albany controlling everything about the grid in real time, you can now have intermittent renewables that are turning on and off, and you can actually predict those a little bit. You know when the wind is going to blow in the Atlantic. You know when the sun is going to shine in Ithaca. And you can put those together, build a little model, and adjust in real time. And you have the batteries are the things that say, I'll take that. You don't need it right now, and then put it back out. And so in the future, the power grid should work remarkably different than it does now. The market should be remarkably different. And the other thing is, for the first time in decades, we're having load growth. Minimal load growth right now. We're doing beneficial electrification with heat pumps. We have some electric vehicles. When we electrify the entire fleet, you're going to double or triple the demand of the power grid, but you don't have to have it all instantaneously. You can now have these batteries scattered throughout. We're going to have lots of different kinds of batteries. You'll have utility scale batteries that are replacing the Astoria and Ravenwood's power plants and on the East River. We're going to have these community batteries that we built that are connected to the distribution grid in the places where the grid would otherwise be overstressed, helping local substations and networks. You're going to have batteries at buildings, connected directly to help with load management, and then you're going to have building batteries at your homes and in basements and garages, in backyards.
The idea of like vehicle to grid,
and then you're also going to have vehicle to grid. You have, vehicles are idle 90% of the time, and if each vehicle
they'll be self-driving, so they won't be idle at all.
They will be idle because it turns out there's a peaking problem. Not everybody's trying to.
Right,
we're not going to change the way we live for our vehicles. Our vehicles are going to respond to our signals, so they will still be idle most of the time. And so there could be price signals for vehicles to be a grid resource when they need to be, and be a transportation when they need to be transportation when they need to be. And so you just think about a vehicle. If you have I don't know where the local parking garage is, but if you have 100 kilowatt hour battery in each car, so just give round numbers, and you have 200 cars sitting there that are sitting there because they happen to be parked. That's one of our battery sites, and it's no extra cost for doing that because you have the cars anyway.
Especially because the peaks, I'm guessing, happen at times when cars are maybe in the afternoon, less likely to be used, perhaps. I don't.
Why don't you give a little thought?
Yeah, well, V2G, I mean, there's a lot there. And I think something important when you're thinking about that is not every vehicle is a passenger vehicle or an individual's vehicle. There's, for example, school buses where 70% of the summer they're sitting idle, and that coincides with when we have peak demand on the grid. And so, or for example, there's Ubers and there's taxis, and the people driving those aren't driving to go on, drive themselves anywhere. They're doing it to make money. And so if they get, an alert, hey, go plug your vehicle and you're going to make more money doing that than you will be driving someone around. There's just like a lot of ways, I guess, that we can think about V2G.
So just talking about business model framework, we built one of the first vehicle to grid projects in New York City with the ride sharing company Revel. It's in Red Hook, Brooklyn. And so we operated that the last few summers and had these cars sitting there, putting power out on the grid.
Wow.
And so it's a little demonstration project. It was funded by NREL. We got some nice awards for doing that. But the idea is that could be scaled up. We don't necessarily have all the technologies, all the vehicles, all the policies, but by demonstrating it works, you can see that being a huge industry in New York City, in the suburbs. I guess I'm kind of a nerd. My electric vehicle that I have here in the city has the vanity plate V2G. So unfortunately, it's a Nissan. It's a Nissan Leaf, and it's one of the few cars that let you do it. Fortunately, I'd like to get a newer car with a bigger battery, but I can't do it because I'm locked into the plate.
That's a problem. But seriously, for V2G, what's the biggest barrier to this being widespread? I have an EV here in the city. I'd love to be able to participate.
So I don't think there's one biggest barrier. There's many small barriers. And so one of them, the vehicles haven't enabled it. A lot of the OEMs, manufacturers have made grand announcements. We're going to have all V2G or vehicle to building or vehicle to load enabled vehicles by time X. That hasn't come to pass. The chargers haven't been built. The standards haven't been put together. The utilities haven't figured out exactly how to interconnect. And so there's a lot of small bits that need to be put in place. But that's where we were sitting with batteries 3 or 4 years ago and with solar 10 years ago. And so I see that as an adventure, right? To learn to put the business model together.
Maybe I'll ask all of you like a higher level questions. We have a lot of aspiring either entrepreneurs or people who want to have careers in clean energy. And so what would be some piece of advice that you would have for students graduating in this environment?
I can go quickly. I mean, you can enter the industry in any way. Like there's engineering, there's finance, there's construction, there's permitting and expediting and working with authorities, the AHJs and the DOB, and there's urban and there's rural and there's everything in between. So maybe that's not so pointed, but like find what you're interested in and you'll be able to apply it to the clean energy transition.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. When I just an atypical career path, right? I did mechanical engineering. I thought I'd work more as an engineer, and then I worked in construction project management. Then I ended up getting interested in the LEED building standard that led me to do a grad degree in sustainability management. And then that got me more, specifically interested in energy itself. And actually, in many ways, it's because I had a classmate who became a good friend who worked at Con Ed, got me interested in like how that fits into the bigger picture. And then once you skip a few, fell into batteries in 2018, and here we are. But so my point is that you could get there in a lot of different ways, and actually had experience doing distributed energy resources, working with cogen and combined heat and power first. And they didn't call it DERs back then, but then that became cool in the last few years. Just call it that way. But and you connect one type of resource to the grid. There's specific nuances, but it's very similar in many ways. So, but I just want to echo Olivia's point that you don't have to have an engineering degree. There's lots of room for business innovation. We work with all types. Like we basically, our company as an example, we have like a finance function, we have a legal function, we have an engineering function, a construction function, really a robust real estate function. I mean, you could argue we're a real estate developer with an energy problem, but and so all of these different skill sets and different formal educations are all super valuable to the end goal of what we're trying to do. So
I guess in my career, I've let curiosity lead where I go. So I'm a physicist by training, as I mentioned. I studied nonlinear dynamics, which is the science of chaos theory, the science of how small changes can have big impacts. And so when I was, in academia at the University of Maryland, in the physics department there, I thought I'd follow the traditional path, do a postdoctoral appointment, become a professor. And during my final year, when I was writing my thesis, I learned about in Washington D.C. there's what's called a Science Technology Policy Fellowship, where you get embedded in one office, in this case, it's the Department of Energy, and get to learn the ins and outs of how federal policy, in this case, it was research and development funding, is made. And you take, it says connecting the dots here. In hindsight, I can say how my career kind of maneuvered to where I am now. I did this postdoc, and I learned about how the energy market actually works in this bird's eye view in the federal government, and where I can make a little impact. So what kind of research and development I can help fund. And it turned out to not to be electronics and optics and photovoltaics. It had to do with soft costs and community involvement and social and behavioral science. And you meet people along the way. So I met my co-founder David, at my cubicle in L'Enfant Plaza in Washington D.C. And he's a serial entrepreneur who was doing some consulting for the office on sort of novel finance and novel ways to deploy clean energy and business model innovation. And we hit it off. We liked working together. And so we spent 3 years at DOE. I decided not to stay in the box. And we started noodling about clean energy innovation together. And this was not our first business model, NineDot. We had pivots along the way. But every time we learned something new, we integrated it into what we're doing. And so my advice is to be curious, ask questions, say yes to things, try them out, right? And there's every company can be a clean energy company, right? It's an important part of every part of the economy.
And I have one last question before we open it up to our audience. It really struck me as we were talking, and the whole case that we sort of, talk about in class is about uncertainty. The fact that there is so much uncertainty in your business. Not only the uncertainty in how much wind is blowing, how much sun is shining, how much the demand is going to be, what the price is going to be, whether you're going to get a permit, and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about just how you handle that uncertainty? We cover simulation in class, and I'd be curious to hear if that's part of what you do in some places, but how do you deal with even sort of bigger sources of uncertainty?
I'll start again. I'm a chaos physicist, which is
perfect.
Again, the science of uncertainty and how it's sort of the canonical idea is sort of the weather model and the butterfly effect. Sort of a butterfly flapping its wings in Texas causes a tornado in Kansas. I don't know. But this idea that small changes can have big impacts. That cuts both ways,
Mm.
right? You can have small changes that cut the wrong way and small changes,
Sure.
but studying the system, understanding how lots of pieces are interconnected is where innovation can occur. And sometimes you're wrong, you take bets and they don't work out, and sometimes you can be rewarded for the taking bets. So all businesses are about uncertainty. The energy industry is also about uncertainty.
I think what strikes me as different about your industry, though, is you're right, all businesses are about uncertainty, but you weirdly have some uncertainty that is very, very quantifiable,
Mhm.
and some uncertainty that very much is not quantifiable. So I'm curious how you juggle those two. Meaning, like something like knowing when the wind blows, as you said, is probably very, very quantifiable, very uncertain, but very quantifiable. So
I'll talk about uncertainty of revenue in terms of
Yeah.
one thought. The idea that there's different types of ways you can design an energy market.
Sure.
And so, for example, there's lots of different battery markets. It's not there's different scales of battery energy storage. There's different states, different nations. So, for example, Texas is the #1 battery storage market in the country, but it's literally the Wild West. You build a battery, there's no guaranteed revenue. You buy low, sell high, and maybe this year you're going to make a lot of money. In the last 2 years, they did, but they might not the next 10 years. And so, getting a bank to underwrite that is challenging. California is the second biggest storage market, and there it's a contract with the utility. You operate the battery, but they just pay you. That's completely bankable. New York kind of has a hybrid approach. Some revenue streams are well known and bankable, and you set it for a long period of time. If you operate in a certain way, you'll get paid. And some move with the market dynamics, and you have to take guesses of how you're going to operate your battery. You have to take guesses about what the wholesale revenue market is. I think that there's room for policy innovation to help withstand that uncertainty. There's also, this big uncertainty is like a swing of 30% tax credit or introducing huge tariffs. Those are binary risks that we're taking. And then it's not just an operating model. It's also, how do you get a project online? So Olivia talked about how Con Edison is lots of different grids stitched together. If you just took one bet, you said, we're going to build one project, we're going to put all our eggs in that basket, it might come back and say, actually, that interconnection is $110 million. We have gotten it's crazy. Or it might get, it's $200,000 for the same project, because you didn't know as much about the grid as you would have liked. So it's about taking a big enough sort of portfolio approach, having this idea that some projects will work out and some projects won't. And so yes, you need to build a business framework around that where you're large enough that you can withstand if you get 5 bad interconnections in a row, it's not the death knell. And so that's part of building some scale and having a scalable business model. And there's uncertainties about building the project. Is it going to take 4 months to get your permit, or is it going to get 22 months to get your permit? And we've had projects that have done both. And for no good reason, we'd like to say we can go into details about that, but really no good reason. And so that's also building this portfolio approach. And I guess we'll also note, it's also diversity around what your business model is. And so when we set up NineDot, the last few years, when we expanded the team from 4 to 70, and we took on outside funding and built a team, we didn't focus, this is our business, this is what we do. We built what we call a products team. And so John Carbajal actually is also a graduate from Columbia, I think the same program as you.
Sumo,
He's on paternity leave right now. He helps think about what are the parts that we can add onto our business model from what we're doing right now. So add this part, add that part, or take away that part, or also whole new ideas, whole new frameworks. And I think that's unique for nominally a development company to be thinking about. We don't want to look the same in a year from now. We don't want to look the same. So I think you can sort of mitigate risk by investing more.
Cool. So maybe we can open it up for questions. So
we also have the
swag for good questions. You told me to bring it. This is great.
I probably don't know. I'm not gonna get Just to start off, I was just curious, what was the idea behind the name NineDot Energy?
That can be one of the answers. What is NineDot? Who's done the case study here? Okay. What is it? What cold call? What is the NineDot challenge?
As far as I know, NineDot is an example, a puzzle, that perfectly exemplifies what thinking outside of the box is. And the challenge is to, if I'm not mistaken, with 4 lines, being able to cross all the dots in this cubicles or whatever without lifting the pen from the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
And you can only do that thinking outside of the box.
the only way is to go. So there's actually different solutions. One, yes, you have to leave the two. If somebody doesn't say the rule set is that you can't leave the box, but your mind says this is what I have to do, and we like to think sort of more broadly. So that's part of the name. And so yes, you have to leave the box and go back in, and you can complete it. Kind of this age-old business school model. This is kind of what the name is. I like to think about what if I had a really, really, really big pencil. These dots, they're not infinitesimally small. You can just go around the entire world and come back out. Or if it's a piece of paper, you can just fold it around, right? And so you can do it with one line. And so this idea of
Oh, I was thinking you meant going around the world. I meant like a pencil that draws a line that is so thick that it just covers the whole thing. I thought that's what you meant.
works. Yeah, works.
I wasn't even
There's
thinking.
lots of different solutions. And so that was the idea of it's kind of we like solving puzzles. We have these. You have a rule set, so it might be the energy tariff, or it might be the permitting guidebook, or it might be the technology. But that's not, just if you read that in isolation, you don't see the bigger picture. And so we like that's where our name comes from. It's also when you think about energy, you think, what can I do at my home? What can I do at my car? What can I do at my building? And it's just about what can I do here? But often energy, it's just actually doing something over there is more valuable than doing something at my home. And so our idea of community energy, building something that's better for the grid, but not necessarily for your own building. And then our website is NineDot Energy, not NineDot Energy.
Oh.
We also own that one too. But the idea that the idea is we're using like the existing infrastructure to like build something new and different. So there was also the number NineDot Energy, which is actually pretty expensive. And so even with our private equity dollars, I haven't decided to buy. But thank you. That's a great question. Do you want a good question?
Go ahead.
All this ability to offset the inability of the grid to optimize renewable energy, which is normally the counter-argument as to why renewables cannot be used at 100% because there's peaks and through, and therefore the network is just not sufficiently stabilized to provide the required amount of energy. With the NineDot's battery storage, what's the environmental impact of the actual batteries, their useful life, and the potential recyclability, which I can see as another counter-argument as to why this is such a great idea as it appears.
So I can answer that in a few ways. First, I'll say we're really fortunate to be in New York City, where we have a really professional government to think about some of these types of questions. And so actually in 2019, as to an administration ago, New York City also wanted to be a leader in setting climate rules. And so that in 2019, they also created it's called Local 97. If you live in an apartment in New York City, you probably hear all about it. It's the Climate Mobilization Act. And they wanted to figure out what is the value of batteries to the power grid and what is the values for climate. And so actually if you look at sort of ESG rules, you want to look at what is the value of a battery to the greenhouse gas reduction. You look at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. If you look at a battery, it consumes energy, period. It's a negative carbon. It's a carbon. It doesn't abate carbon in any of those frameworks, which is silly because obviously it's pulling in lower carbon energy and then it's abating higher carbon energy. That's its purpose. And so when they wrote the Local 97 administrative rules in the last 2 years, New York City took it upon themselves to create really the first calculator for based off the New York City grid to say, during this hour, this is the greenhouse gas emissions factor of the grid. And this is and then that afternoon it's higher. And so if you can kind of do that delta, that math. And then what's really neat is you can actually sell those credits. And so it's one part, there's many parts of your question, but the idea is that this is kind of a novel framework that other states, other cities, other ESG analysts can look at as a framework for the first time looking at the operating profile of a battery and what it does for greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're trying to develop that brand new marketplace. Batteries, can typically be, I mean, they're not remarkably different from an EV battery. So currently, stationary energy storage is a bit player in the lithium-ion battery world. A long time ago, it was consumer devices, the laptop sitting in front of you, and then it became the EV market. More and more, I think over the next decades, it'll become a stationary energy storage market that will be an important piece of the lithium-ion battery carve out or breakout. Currently, it's not. But the batteries aren't remarkably different. If we go to one of our sites, the batteries cells that are inside aren't going to be different from Nissan Leaf or a Tesla Model 3 or what have you. And so there's a much sort of grander theory, thought pattern there about the technology. Our batteries are typically warranted for 15 to 20 years with a degradation curve. And so at some point you might take them out and put new batteries in. And more we're seeing recycling that can take the constituent parts and rebuild them. When I was Department of Energy, I guess 14 years ago, there was a lot of talk about silicon and should we have recycling of solar panels, and the question, should we actually be building solar panels because in 40 years we take these down and recycle them or throw them out. And it haunts me, the idea that you're not going to do something that good for the planet because you're thinking about, yes, we need to think about the future, but we also need to think about doing things now. And so silicon, of course, is one of the most available constituents on the surface of the planet. And so I think these questions come up, and we have good answers, but they're often sort of questions that tell us to stop doing what we're doing.
So you said that if you can do it in New York, you can do it anywhere else. How does the future look for NineDot outside New York, the rest of the U.S., outside the U.S.?
Good question. So we are 70 people now, and that's a lot. That's a good number of people, and it takes a lot of people to do things in New York. We're trying to execute here and show the world that this is the way to do it. We are actively involved in other states' policy framework. We have another Columbia grad who leads our policy team, who's looking at other states involved in the public service commissions and their legislation to make things that look like New York. Because sometimes you want to work hard, sometimes you want to work smart and have the same thing repeated over and over again. And so I guess we didn't talk about that. We talked a little bit about the solar industry in New York. So New York actually has probably the most robust what's called community solar industry in the country. There's 2.5 gigawatts of installed community solar. So these are 5 megawatt solar farms in upstate New York that have proliferated and provided most of the solar energy, the biggest market share for the clean energy industry. And that framework is exactly what underlies our battery business. And it took a few years to innovate the framework from solar to storage. And I think it'll take a few years to take this framework and diffuse to other marketplaces outside of New York. I don't think we're ready to, we're looking at other markets, but I don't think any other markets are quite ready for us.
Liz?
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for coming and sharing. My question is about the competitive landscape. So you mentioned that you're not a battery technology company and a real estate company with the energy problem. So what is your core resource or competitive advantage compared with other battery companies that may be doing similar things?
So we're looking at some of them right here. They have building a team that knows New York, that knows engineering, that knows the policy framework, that knows Con Edison, and is willing to roll up their sleeves and get work done, right? This is an unusual thing to see these folks on a panel at Columbia because we're busy building projects. So I think that's a huge competitive advantage. Over the last few years, we've built a framework around this business model, and we think it works, and it's a bet. We've also raised a significant amount of capital to actually get things done. And so we don't have to take these, I guess, we don't have to always say, we can only look at these 3 sites, because that's all we can ever do. We can say, if there's 50 good sites, let's build all of them. If it's 100 good sites, let's build all of them. So at some time, you want to be scrappy, and we've been a very scrappy company, but at some time you want to get going. And I think that's some of our advantage.
Yeah, Adam, you mentioned working on R&D programs at DOE and then the NREL-funded demo with Rebel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to hear a little more about how non-dilutive and grant funding has played into your fundraising strategy. I know cash isn't a problem anymore, but maybe in the early days, kind of how you leveraged all the funding that's out there.
Also, cash will always be a problem. We're always trying to do more. And there's always a different kind of funding. You want to find better capital for exactly what you're trying to do. A development facility, a tax equity facility, a debt facility. Finance will be a core function of every clean energy company. R&D sort of funding is where we got started. So David and me and our third co-founder is actually a business professor at BU, Nalin Kolatalaka. We applied for a $490,000 grant to start the company in 2015. We got funded in 2016. That lasted about 18 months. We were really scrappy, and we built. Well, it related to what we're doing now. It was kind of getting really deep into energy analytics and energy financing and understanding how energy rates move over time. And stepping back, it looks like a natural route to where we are now. But that funding gave us the ability to go out and learn about a marketplace. We would not exist without that. And so that's the type that for starting a business, these sort of technology to market programs that the federal government has, that NYSERDA has, that even city agencies like the EDC that want to have private programs have, are incredible resources to kind of try things out. And even when we try something new out, like V2G, we applied for funding because it's not our core competency and it's a research project. And actually, we had researchers at NREL, at the National Renewable Energy Lab, doing an analytics project on the side, which they wrote a paper out of. And so I think there's, even at an advanced company, there's room for R&D and there's room for that funding. Yes, we've raised a lot of equity capital to help fund our business, to help fund the projects, and also fund the team. But that has a role. It's really expensive to use, and you want to use it as sparingly as possible. It's kind of like the food pyramid, I guess. I don't think we use the food pyramid anymore, do we?
I think we do. There's the plate. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's a plate.
Yeah, you talked about like different business models that you're looking at. I'm curious if like diesel generators are used as backup power all over the place, and especially like I'm thinking data centers right now, like redundancy power. And have you? I'm curious if maybe explored that or have anyone, especially with the rise of everybody's building AI data centers today. If there's any way to play into that market.
Very good question. So first, at a small scale, if you walk around New York City, you're going to see diesel generators on every block. They're going to be powering a construction site or a film crew or a building that's grid is down, or the grid when it needs.
Or food carts.
Or a food cart. Yeah, those aren't diesel and gas, right?
Oh, fair.
It's
Fine,
the same
fine.
thing.
You're right. Yeah.
Sorry.
What are they in food cards?
No, sorry.
Just petrol?
We've been trying. New York City, as I said, has some of the most robust standards for lithium-ion for battery energy storage anywhere in the world, and so they certify individual technologies, individual cells, individual products. We've been working with a manufacturer out of Buffalo, Viridi, and this is actually, we got grant funding to do this, to bring their mobile battery energy storage solution to New York City to get its approvals from all the authorities having jurisdiction, and have it so that they can, instead of building a diesel gen set at an offsite, you can charge it up actually at one of our sites and then bring it to that site and cycle it around as you need to. And so we're trying to build that business model. Working with business models are not just about business, they're also about working with policies and regulations. That's one end of the spectrum. We're also working with the manufacturer so that sometimes we can take the power out from those batteries and put them back to the grid, which they didn't design their products for. So I think it's pretty neat innovation. So that's one scale, the small scale. We've thought a bit about data centers and how to co-locate with them, and we've come across some things with battery energy storage. We got cut our teeth in New York City actually using a different technology. It's called a fuel cell. It uses natural gas that's about 30% cleaner than the grid, using a non-combustion technology, a company called Bloom Technology. We built 3 of those projects in New York City, actually, and we ended up financing them with a company called Captona, which is another Columbia Business School alum. I don't know if you know Izette Susan, is a terrific guy here in the city. And we built those projects. We started them in 2018. They came online in 2020 and 2022. Bobby helped build those projects. And that company has been trying to work on electrolyzers, so you can take excess power and make hydrogen and then put it back to the fuel cells. but they've been innovating along the way and building really neat technology. And they're one of the thoughts on how to scale up data centers more rapidly than building out the power grid. And so we're not directly involved in that, but that company has really been it's a thought, not related to NineDot.
Just curious, what are the fuel cells rated at? Are they like 5 megawatt? Like,
I mean, they're modular, just like our batteries. So they come in typically 250 or 300 kilowatt units, and you piggyback them together. Our batteries, which are typically 5 megawatts, are not one 5 megawatt box. They are typically 5 or 7, depending on what units you buy, and you piggyback them together. So this modular design is, we can talk about modularity and standardization and innovation here, but it's how do you decide the right technology market fit?
Yeah, how far out do you think we are from like non-lithium ion batteries actually being on the grid, like a company like Form Energy, like a multi-day battery? Like, are you guys exploring that as options for, your projects in New York? Or?
So we do talk to long duration energy storage companies, a bunch of really novel manufacturers in New York or all across the country, world. Today, I think the technologies are advancing. The markets are not yet here, and so these are R&D projects from a market perspective, not necessarily from a technology perspective. And unfortunately, they're really expensive R&D projects. And so things like the Federal Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations are not providing $500,000 awards, but $50 million awards. Wow. And so we love to explore it, hypothetically. We talk to these companies. I haven't figured out the right use case for it yet.
That was actually, I was going to ask, but maybe you could sort of look into the future. And I've sort of seen this graph of like, as you approach net peak power, you've got 4-hour batteries that are sort of cutting off that peak, but that creates a use case for longer duration storage where now you have to deploy energy for longer to start to bring that peak down. What do you kind of see as the role for long duration, maybe in the city or more broadly?
Yeah, it's a great question. So New York State in their energy storage roadmap also carved out by what year and what number of megawatts. So it's a little annoying. The state, they set legislature sets the rules, and then the NYSERDA and DPS, the Public Service, has to execute them. And all the rules are based off of capacity, meaning export capacity, megawatts, gigawatts, but not megawatt hours and gigawatt hours, which is how you measure storage. And so a 5 megawatt battery with 4 hours storage is different than a 5 megawatt battery with 100 hours of storage. And so unfortunately for the policymakers or the NYSERDA, it's like, let's have the shortest battery possible to meet our goals, right? This is the problem of creating incentives and creating markets. But in their framework, they've kind of done the math to figure out what they think, how the grid evolves over time, how much longer duration, whether it's 8-hour, 12-hour, 20-hour storage you need over time. And I'd say it's going to be wrong, whatever their model says. But by 2030, I think there's an important role in how markets work, because you won't want to do this all with 4-hour battery storage. It's really expensive really quickly. And so actually the New York, or all energy markets, are complex with lots of different regulatory bodies. And so you have in New York, it's the NYSERDA that gives incentives for clean energy, of the Department of Public Service to set the rules for the utilities. Then you have the New York ISO, which runs the wholesale marketplace, which is regulated by the federal government through FERC. And they have energy storage rules. It's very wonky, capacity accreditation curve that they reset every year. And they say, let's build 2-hour batteries because that's better for the grid. And so it's just like, you need some consistency here. But what I'll say, having inconsistency, having sort of grayness in the rules, is where it leads to leads to sort of in business innovation. When you can find these sort of places where one rule set doesn't exactly fit another rule set, I think that it could kill everything. Actually, nothing gets built. But I think that's where I think you can find really cool things to do.
One last question. Yep.
We've talked a lot about the hardware, but can you talk a little bit about the software used to manage the batteries, deploy them, and are all of the batteries being used at the same exact time, or is it based on the need, based on the locality of the actual battery?
So New York City, Con Edison, they have 83 different networks. So how the grid peaks and how it has troughs in Upper Manhattan is different than in Southern Staten Island or the Rockaways, or Rockaways are part of a different utility district. And so what they've done is that they've defined different windows for each of those areas for when you should charge and when you should discharge. And so it could be 2 to 6 p.m. on a summer afternoon. It could be 4 to 8 p.m. It could be the morning. And then actually based off some comments that our policy team put together, they're actually now we're going to also have network-specific off-peak hours. And so each grid will also say you should charge during this period because this is what's better for this feeder for this line. I don't quite think it's granular enough. I think we can keep innovating there, and we can do really fun things like if you have beneficial electrification, like electric vehicles somewhere else on this feeder line or this substation, can you synchronize the output of this battery to counteract or offset that load? There's some sort of inklings of those ideas that we've been trying to push at the policy level. So currently, it's relatively straightforward to run a battery in New York City. You have to have certain hours that you preset for most of our projects. Some projects are in special programs where Con Edison, they do literally call, but they also send electronic messages, computer-to-computer messages for certain super peak days. It's kind of like the same thing on your phone. You get your text message to reduce your AC usage. And so batteries do the same thing to counteract the grid. And so you also have to predict some pieces of the wholesale market, and so you have to decide when the peak hour of the year is. That's actually the most important hour to run our batteries. We get paid about 40% of our revenue for hitting 1 hour of the year. That's for the entire state. So all the batteries will be outputting during that single peak hour, which maybe is not best for the local grid, but that's how they designed the market. So there's room for tariff or regulatory innovation. We've worked with a software company called STEM. They're kind of an artificial intelligence company, but they have really complicated algorithms to predict when Con Ed's going to call. I really think we can really basically currently run our batteries with an egg timer. It's not that complicated, but over time it will evolve. And so one thought to leave you with is that currently the hottest day in August, the hottest day of the summer, is when batteries are the most useful for the grid, because that's when the grid is overstressed because we're using air conditioning in buildings and in homes, and the grid has that peak hour of the year. That's why we build the entire infrastructure around it. In 2034, when we're sitting, if we came back here, the idea is that the coldest night in February should be the peakiest time of the year, because everybody will have their electric heaters running. And so batteries use cases have to evolve over time. And that's a really stark example. We lock into a tariff that tells us to only run from June through September, when we all know with a battery that's going to last 15 or 20 years, that within 5 or 10 years, we'll actually be wanting to use it in January and February. And so we need to be thinking constantly about what the use cases are and how they actually help the grid. We don't want to be locked into these somewhat, temporal frameworks for how the grid operates.
So on this note, I think we'd like to thank Olivia, Adam, and Bobby